Sounds great. Thanks, Matt.
Of
Appreciate
course.
that. And anticipate that probably many people on today's webinar have joined us in the past, but for the handful of you or so that haven't, just a brief introduction of me. So I go by Tom. You might see some my in writing Thomas Diliberti, but I go by Tom. My touch of my history here is I've been in the energy industry for more than 20 years, and the passion I have is really trying to help organizations save energy and save money. And so I'm sure that'll come through in the webinar today. The other thing to note is I work for Energy Cap, and if you're unfamiliar with who Energy Cap is as a company, it's a utility bill tracking software program, and we offer all these tools to help our clients try to be as efficient as possible. So with that in mind and kicking us off, I'd like to start with a poll question. And the theme of today's webinar is on benchmarking. And so I'm curious to find out from the attendees today, the organizations that you work for, are you legally bound to comply with some type of regulation or compliance statute? I'm just wondering how pervasive this is around the country, whether people are seeing this in their day to day or whether this is more theoretical and people are aware of these compliance standards or whether it's starting to hit the people that are in attendance for today's webinar. So if you could just, it's happening, yes, or it's not happening for you, or you're not sure because it's not a role that you play within your company where you're just not sure what's going on behind the scenes. So just trying to give you another 30 seconds or so here to respond.
Looks like majority yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Very, very minimal, not sure, but yes seems to be winning.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. So hopefully some of the information today will be a reiteration for some, or maybe a different understanding of what you believe the law to be. And for the others who are maybe new to this or haven't been exposed, my intention today is just give a general overview for how this is affecting organizations, as well as just the bits and pieces of this and things that you can do to use benchmarking and data analysis to try to become more efficient. Okay, so with that as a backdrop, the first thing I want to do is just talk about today's agenda. So we want to start with the benchmarking fundamentals. I just want to define benchmarking for you. Talk about EUI, make sure you have a clear understanding of what EUI is. Then go through the common benchmarking resources or sources that are out there. There are a few that are very common. Want to make sure you're aware of all those. Talk about Energy Star and CPEX. Get into the law, the compliance and the regulations by state, where you can see how one state compares to another around the country. And then probably the last 10, 15 minutes of the presentation are going to be talking about the variables that I suggest you benchmark. And I actually want to show Energy Cap a little bit today, where you can use some of the tools in Energy Cap. It's a great resource or a great tool for doing benchmarking. And I just want to make sure that people are aware of the benchmarking attributes or the variables you want to track and just help you get more familiar with our tool and what it can do to help. For those new attendees, giving you a little bit of context, is we've been running this energy strategy series now for months, and it kicked off last December, and we provided this roadmap. And what I wanted to do with this roadmap was create a document that could be distributed out to people. And if you were new to the industry or you didn't quite know where to begin, you were looking for some direction, I view this roadmap as a script or a way to methodically go through energy management, conservation, and efficiency ideas in a systematic way that hopefully brings value and results. And so that's what you're seeing on the screen here. And so we've really covered the blue section, the purple section at the top, and we're in the green section now, where we're taking a look at trying to embed and evolve. So if you're working within an organization, you're trying to drive culture change, I think benchmarking helps to make that happen. And so conceptually, this series will continue to run for the rest of the year. And we're going to just work from top to bottom in this roadmap. But a lot of the content has been in this systematic way of doing things. And just so it's not out of place, if you're new, that's what you're jumping into the middle of here. So today's topic, benchmark. I just wanted to read the textbook definition of benchmarking. So it's the systematic process of measuring your organization's products, services, or practices against industry leaders or accepted standards. Its primary purpose is to identify performance gaps, establish rational goals, and implement best practices to drive continuous improvement. And so I think we can all see the spirit of benchmarking and what we want to try to accomplish doing benchmarking. So now it's just the reality. What's happening in the real world? How are people making use of it? What are the tools and what are the resources that are available to you? EUI, this idea of energy use intensity, or some people refer to EUI as energy use index. This is one of the key metrics that people use, and it's the primary one, top of the list, the a number one thing that people generally start with in terms of trying to find opportunities for savings and energy reductions. And I just wanted to make sure you had a clear understanding of what EUI is. So EUI is a calculation of the total energy consumed in a year divided by the total gross floor area. And it's measured in a couple different common units. So one of the two is kBTU per square foot, and the other one is MMBTU per square foot. If you didn't realize this, one of the things that people get confused with the M's and the K's and the metric system and different units of measure is the MM for MMBTU would be like 1,000 BTUs. And so if you haven't heard that description, sometimes it's helpful for understanding when you're moving decimal places, you're understanding units. Do know that those are Roman numeral M's, so MM for 1,000 BTUs. Next slide here is just a calculation. I wanted to make sure I took you through a simple calculation so you can see the logic for how EUI is calculated since it's so fundamental to benchmarking. So over on the left-hand side of the slide, you see I've made up this building square footage of a couple 100,000 square feet. We've got electrical use here, natural gas use, and water use. And those are the variables that many people look at when they want to calculate EUI. So what you have to do first, if you're doing a typical EUI calculation, is you have to convert that energy to a common unit of measure. And so hopefully you can see my slide as my cursor here as I move it across the screen here. But the electrical value of 1,000,000 kWh, so the units of energy, you have to convert this into BTUs by multiplying by this factor. So this is a well-known factor that people recognize as 3,412 BTUs per kWh. So you're converting your unit of electrical energy into a standard unit of energy as a BTU, a British thermal unit. The next thing you need to do is you need to do the same thing with your natural gas. And this, once again, assumes the building is consuming natural gas. So in this made up example, we were saying 50,000 therms. You got to multiply by this number. And this is the exact number, but many people will round this 99,967 BTUs per therm into 100,000 because the math is just a lot easier. So if you take 100,000 times the 50,000, you get this number, this 5 billion number. So just pausing for a second and summarizing. So you're taking your electrical, you're taking your natural gas usage for a building for a year, and you're converting them into a common unit of measure. And then people think about water. Well, in this example here, we've got 20,000 kgals of water, but I wanted to note that water is not counted in your energy totals. So there's no conversion here. Water, even though we encourage everybody to track it, you can track it within the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and it's always useful because there's opportunities to save. It is not part of the calculation for EUI. So once you convert into this common unit, you got to sum it up, and that's what I'm trying to show here. So this big number here, this 8 billion number, but many times these values are not shown in BTUs. They're converted. So they're converted into kBTUs by taking this big number and just lopping off the last three zeros. You're dividing by 1,000. So this 8 billion number becomes an 8 million number. And then finally, the last part of the calculation, back to the formula, you've got to take that energy use, divide by the square footage, and it would turn out to be this number. It's about 42 kBTU per square foot. These are the values that you'll begin to see in charts and graphs. And when you look at standard data, this number begins to look familiar to people once you get the lay of the land. Okay, but that's the root and the foundation for any type of EUI calculation. And sometimes these conversion units based on what you're calculating, if you're doing site EUI or you're doing source EUI, these values can change, and we can talk about the reasons as to why. But the concept is you're taking all of the total energy and dividing by the total square footage. I wanted to give you another metric here as cost per square foot, and I also wanted to teach you about this just in case you didn't know this. I'd be curious if anybody is with us today from the state of Florida. But what you're looking at here on the screen is something that the state of Florida offers. And what it is it's a chart or a sheet here showing all of the cost. If you look at the rows and the columns here, so just taking the first row going across. So it's the cost that this particular county is spending on natural gas, bottled gas, electricity. What the state of Florida requires by law is that all the school districts in the counties, there's county school districts, they roll up their total cost and they need to provide their total square footage. And they create this metric of cost per square foot, which is an awesome comparison to see how you stand against the other counties in the state. So it's this concept of benchmarking. And like I say, in the state of Florida, this is called the FISH report. And also notice the date up here in the top corner. This is roughly a year and a half old. But every year, the counties have to provide this information. The state provides this information. And I think it's a phenomenal tool to see where you're at on the continuum of performance. And it's the state's subtle way of really trying to drive change and hold people accountable. And so, if you're not from the state of Florida, you're from a different part of the country, which I would imagine most people on the call are, you might check it out and see if there's something like this within your state. Because Florida is the one that I ran into in my work. I didn't find any others, but I also haven't checked in a few years, and so there might be maybe instruments out there that might be available. So check that out for your particular state, your area, and see if you can find something like that that could be helpful. Wanted to talk about too the common benchmarking sources or resources. So I just gave you this unique one for the state of Florida, but the most common is the Energy Start Portfolio Manager. And if you are unfamiliar with what it is, it's a tool. So it's a free tool that businesses, organizations can send all of their data to Energy Start Portfolio Manager, and it will do the math. It will calculate EUI and it will track all the data. So it's a great free tool, the number one tool that people are using for benchmarking purposes. Another real good one is CPEX. So if you haven't seen that, we'll talk about that today, but it provides EUI data, median data, again, for organizations to understand how they're doing. And two others that are less common, and I would anticipate most organizations would use these when they're further down the road and they're looking for more data, but ASHRAE provides some building performance data sets for you to compare, as well as the Better Buildings Alliance provides some data that some people use for comparison as well. I did want to flag too that ASHRAE provides some great energy simulation and energy modeling resources for you. Some of them come at a cost, and there are some free tools out there. But if you're new to this and you're starting out, you don't know where to look, start with Energy Star, look at the CBEX data, and then work through this list. And believe me, before you know it, you'll have a lot of data and a lot of ways to compare the performance of your buildings. I also wanted to talk about Energy Star basics, just in case we had somebody in the webinar today who hadn't run into Energy Star yet. Want to make sure there's a clear understanding of this because it is so fundamental to doing benchmarking. So Energy Star, can't imagine anybody watching today who isn't familiar with the logo, the icon up here in the top corner, because really it's kind of everywhere, particularly if you're in a big box store, you're shopping at Home Depot or some store looking for appliances, you see the Energy Star logo. And that's where the Energy Star program originated years ago. Was the DOE had actually at the time it was the EPA had a program where what they did is they tested appliances and they wanted to rate and identify the more efficient ones and note them with the logo so uh, educated shoppers could make sure they were finding equipment, washers, dryers, coffee makers, things that would have the Energy Star logo that would be more efficient. And so that's where the program started, and it's evolved into being a program to track building data and performance of buildings as well. But that's a little bit of the history of Energy Star. And so Portfolio Manager, mentioned this a minute ago, is just a free tool. It's secure, it's online, it's available. And the benefit of the tool is once all of the utility data gets pumped into the tool, is the buildings get scored on a simple scale from 1 to 100. And what this is it's looking at a percentage of how you would compare relative to your peers. So for instance, if you score an 80, what that means is you're in the 80th percentile, which means that if you have an 80, you are in the top 80% of the buildings in the country in that particular building demographic. Or if you're a 92, it means that you're in the 92nd percentile. So the higher the score means that you're performing better. And also, what Energy Star does is they have a recognition program or a certification program. If you score higher than 75, you can get that logo, you can get Energy Star recognition because you're being recognized in the top 25% of the buildings in the country. The other thing that Energy Star promotes is they talk about on average is people that use Portfolio Manager really do see consistent savings year over year because of the principles of benchmarking, where when people are looking at the performance of a building, just naturally people do better and better. And so the building scores better and better year after year because somebody's mining the store and somebody's doing things to improve the performance of the building. Another thing that you should know is that commercial buildings use a tremendous amount of energy. And the stat that's thrown around an awful lot is that 30% of the energy that's used in buildings is just wasted. And a lot of times it goes back to some basic things like BAS faults or poor set points. If you haven't been with us in previous webinars, we talked about some of these things a couple months ago. And so if you're looking for ideas and strategies to try to capture this stuff, that's what the intent of a couple webinars ago was. But just know, again, this stat is very profound. And so know that very likely you're working in a situation where there's a lot of opportunity for savings. So it starts with benchmarking. It's getting the data into the right tools so you can track it and you can pursue capturing that 30% waste. Let's transition to the Commercial Buildings Energy Consumption Survey, or CBEX. So CBEX is this idea where there's a survey. So again, the Energy Information Administration, the EIA, they are collecting information about buildings and they are generating data for people to do comparisons with. So what they collect data on is the fuel types or the fuel that's being used to power buildings, the size of buildings, lighting, HVAC systems, building types, use, and many more things as well. So we've got the web address down here at the bottom if you want to go check it out. But the output for this is they have documents that look like this. And if you haven't seen this before, just giving you a chance to digest this, what's being represented here in this table are median values for EUI, both source and site EUI, and I'll explain that a little bit more here in a second. So what this is saying, just taking the first row here, this bank branch, is this is saying is the median EUI score for a bank branch is roughly 210. The site EUI is roughly 88. So it's telling you the middle value. It's telling you, looking at all the bank branches from around the country that submitted data, or all the K-12 schools that submitted data, these values are the middle. And the power of that now is being able to compare your values to those values in order to decide if you're more or less efficient, and ultimately allows you to take action or not, do the right things in order to help your organization do better. So backing up a little bit and just talking about why the two different columns. So what most people refer to is site EUI. So this represents the amount of energy that's being used at the site level, like we did the calculation a few minutes ago. How much energy divided by how much square foot by the square footage of the building, and you get these values in this column. Where source area EUI, what that does is it talks about the power plants that are serving the buildings. And the best example is an electricity power plant. You probably know that many power plants consume different raw forms of energy. So you might have an electrical plant that consumes natural gas, and or it might consume coal, or it might be a nuclear plant. At different times of the day, it might be using different source energy materials. And so what this idea is here is this relates back to, if you were to think about in the region where you are, what the source EUI would be, or what the energy that was needed at the source in order to provide the energy for this particular location. All right, so it's taking a look at the building itself and more or less a much smaller view, where this is looking at a more of a grand view for the region where it's servicing a building in order for you to see what the average is. Okay, so that's CPEX data. And I also wanted to give you this, some EUI building ranges. And this is just me doing a quick search in chat GPT, just to get a feeling for what the ranges might be. And so you can see by building type here, whether it's an office building or a grocery store, a hospital, a school, What they're doing is they're giving you a range for where you might have high performance EUIs, and this is in kBTU per square foot. I just noticing I didn't put that unit here on the chart. Sorry, that was just an oversight on my behalf. But then it's also what's typical ranges for schools, as a for instance, or if something's energy intensive, or another way of saying energy intensive, if it's wasteful. Chances are there's opportunities to save here. All right, so if you're looking for a chart or just trying to get acclimated to what some reasonable numbers are, these would be those for comparison. So summarizing where we've been so far in these first 15, 20 minutes of the webinar is I wanted to give you the foundation of benchmarking, EUI, just give you some metrics, some things, some resources of where you can look. And now I want to transition into some conversations or discussions about the law. And so what you see on the screen now is the four different categories of compliance and regulation laws that are out there. And so they might look a little different, it might feel a little different, but I wanted to try to logically explain this in a way that you can see how an organization might progress through this, or how even a state might change their laws or change the structure over time in order to hold organizations more accountable. So the first level is benchmarking, which is really the theme of this webinar today. It's getting all the data in one spot and starting to analyze it. Building performance standards here. So these are targets where you're going to face some penalties. The next layer of what's beginning to happen around the country is there's requirements to do auditing and recommissioning in order to get more performance out of the systems. And the fourth layer is what's called climate disclosure. And over the next couple of slides, I want to go through each of these a little bit more in depth and give you a little bit more breadth about what each means. So let's start with benchmarking. And just why do you benchmark in the first place? Well, what you've begun to see is that benchmarking drives behavior change. We saw that in a couple slides ago when I'm talking about Energy Star and how when people start to track their data, they start to get better year after year because it's driving behavior change and organizational change. And it's also moving people closer to net zero. So once you baseline a building, it's going to help you define incentives and find opportunities. And the other big part of benchmarking is it's relatively low cost. So it's a low barrier to just starting out. And so requiring organizations, say a city, requiring the organizations or the businesses within the city boundaries to submit benchmarking data is really not a heavy lift or a high cost. So it's just the first place to get started is let's benchmark and let's start getting everybody's data. Where it can end up going is doing certifications like LEED or Energy Star. And we talked about that a little bit, and I'll continue to beat that drum as we go through today. But what benchmarking usually does, it leads to building performance standards, which is the next slide here. So what are building performance standards? Well, building performance standards are just that. They're expectations or targets, they're standards that the building needs to meet, or there's going to be consequences, there's going to be penalties. So many times these building performance standards are based around EUI. It could be an emissions cap, but buildings are being forced, organizations are being forced to cut their energy use, or they're going to have to pay some type of financial penalty. So there's audits that are being done, reporting that's happening, verification, and the targets, if they're not being met, the penalties can be pretty steep. So sometimes those penalties can amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars in penalties, where that money might go back to the state or the city or the organization imposing those standards. But another more creative way that's being used in some jurisdictions, they offer what's called alternative compliance pathways. And what that is, it's the organization that is not meeting the standard. Rather than paying a penalty, say to that city or to that state, that money goes into a fund, a green fund. And if you're familiar with that term, the idea is it's going to fund green initiatives and green activities and building improvements. So you're more or less being forced to take some of your own money, allocate it back to yourself, and then there's going to be expectations of spending that money on your own facilities in order to improve those. And I love that idea. I think that's a great way for the building performance standards to work, is just moving everybody in the right direction. So now the third in the sequence is after you've gone through benchmarking and building performance standards, another thing that's becoming more common, and the two places around the country where this is happening the most right now is in New York and in Seattle. But there are requirements that building owners have to get their systems assessed, with audits and recommissioning efforts need to be done. So those efforts might be occurring with the HVAC, with lighting, with controls. And if you've seen me speak at all over these last few months, boy, the drum I beat a lot is this idea that systems get out of whack. And if you're not assessing them and updating them and recommissioning them, you're just going to be using a lot more energy. And so I love this idea because I've seen it firsthand in the field, is if those systems get ignored, there's just waste that begins to pop up all over the place. So holding people accountable and putting this as part of the overall plan to make sure that organizations are staying efficient is a great idea. So these are less common than benchmarking, but this is becoming more and more popular because I think there's a recognition of the benefit of this. And finally, the fourth level here is this idea of climate disclosures. So the logic here is that climate disclosures, the intent is to try to help investors, lenders, and markets understand the performance of a particular business for the purposes of investing in improvement and holding others accountable. And so climate disclosures many times are just tied back to emission standards. Again, they're tracked, assessments are made, changes happen, but it's all about holding others accountable and trying to identify the largest emitters of carbon emissions. So this again is another strategy. Many times this is tied back to economics as well, where the first several categories are more about energy use. This is tied back to the economics and the overall health of the particular building. So those are the four different standards. And now the question is, who's responsible? So if different organizations and buildings have to do these things, really who's responsible? And I tried to break this out on the two different sides here. So looking at it through the vantage point of the building owner or looking at it through the vantage point of the utilities. And as you scan through this list, ultimately it's the building owner that's responsible. They've got to collect the data, they've got to submit it and validate it, they've got to engage, they've got to maintain the records and pay the fees. At the end of the day, legally, building owners are responsible. But what I think is great is the utilities are not off the hook. Utilities are also expected to make this easier on the building owner. So they're supposed to make data more readily available. They're supposed to aggregate data. They're supposed to help building owners submit the data through Energy Star. And so the utilities role, hopefully they're getting actively engaged at the owner level, but their role is to really try to simplify this particular process. And to the best of my knowledge, I think that's happening out here. And so I like that concept as well. It's working together for the betterment of all involved. What you see on the slide now is a representation from IMT. So the Institute for Market Transformation. So they produce one of these graphs or these charts every couple months, and they keep it updated on changes. And if you haven't seen this before, I want to draw your attention to the bottom right where the legend is. And so you see the different colors. And what I want you to notice is the light green and the light blue represent, these are areas, locations, could be states, could be cities where benchmarking is required. And if you notice, there are more requirements as you go across here. So for public and commercial buildings here, it's public and commercial as well as multifamilies. So as you allow your eyes to kind of dance between the light blue color and this green color, you start to see it popping up all over the place. And unsurprising, it's began in California. It's over here on the East Coast, and so that's not surprising at all. What is interesting, though, is when you start to transition to the darker colors. So now you have benchmarking, but now there's additional actions that are required. And again, notice the subtle difference here between the blue and the green. So you have Washington and Oregon, and you have the state of Colorado. So you have to benchmark, but you also have to take it to the next level. And that's what's being shown here by the darker blue color and the green. And so, in my opinion, the main takeaway from this is it's great to see that this isn't just isolated on the coast. So it's not just a California thing. It's starting to happen all over the country and it's popping up in cities and everybody's trying to find their way. And my suggestion is that you might, if you're in a state or an area where this is active, you might just link to this website. Just say this is a favorite, this IMT, and take a look at this and stay aware of this information so you're current with what might be happening in your area. Want to talk a little bit more too about a few of the laws, just the ones that have been in the news, and just give you an update on these. So in this first column over here, California Senate Bill 253 and 261, These very much in the news over the last several months, even probably as far back as a year. But what these Senate bills are is they're holding businesses accountable in the state of California for their energy use. And the key thing, and I put it in purple text here, is there was a deadline that was August 10th. So it was very, just literally days away, and that's been bumped back to November. But the idea with Senate Bill 253 is its scope one and scope two reporting deadline, again, is now in November. So this is real for businesses in the state of California, whereas scope three reporting is going to begin in 2027. Now, 261, Senate Bill 261, so far is being treated as voluntary because it's in the courts. So the Ninth Circuit Court is taking a look at this, but many people in the state of California are preparing that this will become law. And so it's another reporting requirement that's coming down the pipe. In a similar way, the state of New York has some bills that are mere Senate Bill 253 and 261. And notice too that they have regulations that are due in the end of December 2026. So California, New York leading the way. And these are a list of cities that are first time deadlines: Milwaukee, Detroit, Indianapolis, and so on here. So once again, sharing the chart or the map of the US as well as this, just trying to capture some of the highlights of where this is happening around the country. I wanted to circle back to Energy Star, give you an update on this too, because you've probably seen this in the news that Energy Star is fully funded through 2026, fiscal year 2026, but the money hasn't been allocated in 2027. Another thing to note, if you haven't heard this fact, is that Energy Star used to be housed within the EPA, but the EPA reduced staff from 13 down to one, and it also transitioned to the DOE. So Energy Star now is officially part of the DOE. And if you haven't used this directly, something to note is it's just a little bit slower than it used to be. And we would always encourage you to back up the data. Just make sure that you're keeping your data current and backed up, because there's no guarantee of the future of this program. And so better to be safe and have a backup plan. The other thing that's new too is there's now an 11-month waiting period between certifications. So if you wanted to do certifications and then redo certifications, you're going to have to wait 11 months to do that a second time. So that's another requirement or change that's happened. Another new thing is there's a next gen certification, which is now active. And if this term is new to you, the idea is you still have to meet the criteria of having a high building score, the way we discussed earlier. But now there are emission standards, and there's also a requirement for renewables, where the energy that's flowing into your building to serve your building has to be greater than 30% of the load. And so next gen certifications is another way, another tool that's being used to try to raise the bar and get more organizations using renewables for a better or a higher certification. And my overall coaching of you on this is just watch for program changes, because they could happen at any time. And the politics with this is also something to keep an eye on, just because of how this is transitioned from the EPA to the DOE. Now, where we're at in the presentation today is I wanted to transition into some glimpses of Energy Cap. I anticipate that many on the call today might be Energy Cap users. And for those of you that aren't using Energy Cap, this is what Energy Cap looks like. And the reason I wanted to use this is because I think Energy Cap does a great way of organizing things, and it definitely helps the user to understand the different benchmarking capabilities. And whether you do this within the software, a different software, or even in a spreadsheet someplace, the concepts are all the same, that you have to sort things and stack things, organize things in a way for you to find the outliers. And so what I want to do is just go through the menu over here that's in this purple box and just show you how you can toggle between things. So how I would begin to benchmark and organize the data is, I think you first of all have to come up with categories for how you're going to do that. And so here there's a few different choices. So we have a category where you can organize things by energy managers, facility managers. So you'd have a chance to put, whether you have 3 or 5 or 10 different people. I think you've got to benchmark by the people in order to understand the performance of the people. You might benchmark by HVAC types. So as some examples here, maybe you have buildings with boilers, or you just have electric buildings where there is no gas going to a building, or maybe you have buildings that don't even have HVAC units. Maybe you work for the parks department and you just have all these outbuildings that have electricity, but they don't have any heating or cooling, and you just want to understand how they're doing. Another example of categories would be lead status. So if your organization is very involved with lead, you might want to dump them into these different categories so you can filter them and sort them. Other reporting groups, like all buildings you might want to look at in total, or really big buildings, buildings more than 50,000 square feet. Maybe you want to track separately Energy Star compliant buildings or buildings that went through a energy audit years ago, and you just want to see how they're doing now. Another category is just what the places are like or how the building is being used. Is it an office building? Is it a laboratory? Is it manufacturing? Once again, the reason I did this is because these are all excellent ways of doing this, whether you're using Energy Cap or another tool. But what you want to do is you want to sort them and sift them into these buckets, into these categories, so that you can filter them in a way like what you see here on the screen, where you can take a look at the cost per square foot or the energy use per square foot, because likely the buildings with the most opportunity to save, not always, but likely the ones are at the top of the list, assuming that you filtered it this way. And so that's where you want to spend your time. The other thing that I would say is don't just do things by buildings. Take a look at meters. You might want to filter your meters or sort the meters, benchmark them against areas like this, these reporting groups or commodities. So where you're looking at electricity or natural gas. So make use of some tools in order to unpack it and benchmark. This next shot here is just showing how in Energy Cap specifically, how these menus would allow you to sort them very quickly, differently from cost to use to demand. And likewise, how you have another drop-down menu that would allow you to take a look at other variables as well, like a day or area or occupant, working hours, units produced. And so think about the variables in your workspace, what's important, and many times there are relationships with energy use for those variables, and give yourself the tools to compare things and do some analysis. Another image here with Energy Cap is what's changed here now is now we're clicked on buildings with boilers. And why I wanted to share this and just talk through this a little bit is this menu here allows you to, once again, you can sort things by cost per square foot. But the other thing that should not be ignored when you're benchmarking and you're looking for strategies and ways to improve things is looking at things such as total annual cost is very important as well. Because you might look at a number like this at the top and say, hey, this building has a lot of waste because it has a high cost per square foot, and that might well be true. But you could also make the argument because this has less annual cost than the one below it, maybe there's more value in chasing down the waste that's in this building because you spend more money in that particular building. And so as you benchmark and as you organize, make sure you're looking at multiple variables at once and really targeting where the opportunities are. And then a building like this further down where you spend a lot of money at, okay, this number here, this $350,000, because its cost per square foot is lower, I don't think I'd start there. Like at the golf course, again, knowing that it's a golf course and just how it's used, um, probably doesn't make a lot of sense to start there. But do your homework, do some analysis, and make sure you're sorting the buildings in ways that's going to steer you back towards where you can save the most. Another thing that I think gets forgotten about is people forget about interval data, or people don't benchmark with interval data, and I think that's a missed opportunity. What you're looking at on the screen now is electrical data. So this is usage data. If you notice on the axis here, it's usage data. So it's the energy being used, electrical energy being used by days. So each one of these humps represents a day of the week. And my point to this and why I wanted to share is I think you should begin to benchmark the performance of your buildings with interval data as well as utility data. So look at the trends, look at the days of the week. Are they different? Are they the same? How high are the values? And the other thing is you can take data like this and confirm that things are being turned off. Here you have an example of a building that's being turned off on the weekends where there's low energy use on the weekends. So don't just be drawn into using utility data. Use any data available to you and learn about your buildings and benchmark and begin to get an understanding. Now, this slide here is actually Energy Cap, the tool itself. This helps you with some of the benchmarking because this is a similar picture to the one I had previously. where it's showing energy use in the black line going across the picture here. So it's showing you 5 days of energy use. And what's being generated in the green wave that's following along is what's normal behavior. So the software is benchmarking what's normal and allowing the user to see when you're within the normal and outside of the normal. So conceptually, you're benchmarking in a different creative way in order to find unusual anomalies. And finally, this graph here is just another picture within Energy Cap, just drawing your attention here. It's a heat map. So this would be a way to benchmark the buildings. And what happens with this, if you haven't seen these heat maps, is the darker the color means the greater the energy use. And so it gives you a chance to see when that energy use is happening, whether it's early in the day, late in the day, whether it's consistent day after day. Are there, dark spots in the evening, which means systems will be turning on. So make sure you take advantage of all the tools you have available to benchmark and to understand them. As we wind down today's webinar, I wanted to leave you with a list here. And in this list here are the variables. If you were to ask Tom, hey, Tom, what do you think are the most important things to benchmark? This would be the list of where I'd start. I would say you got to start with EUI, cost per square foot. Another great thing to benchmark is average unit cost. So looking at how much money you're spending per unit by doing a tariff analysis and looking at your vendors. And if you have the option of switching to a different vendor for your electrical service or for your gas, your water service, allows you to find opportunities. But as I just mentioned, demand and interval data is a great thing to benchmark. Building use, commodities, age of buildings, mechanical systems, and it's a big one here. Mechanical systems or BAS. I would imagine some on the webinar today are from organizations that are really big, where you have building automation systems or multiple building automation systems, or you might have Siemens, you might have Schneider Electric, you might have Johnson Controls. I would say put them in different buckets and benchmark them against one another and see how they do relative to one another. Because if you're signing future contracts, you're managing buildings, if you have a system that seems to perform better in your buildings, you might as well learn that. So benchmark your building automation systems. If you're an industrial, benchmark your production processes, try to identify where there's weaknesses there. And don't forget the people, your energy managers, your vendors, your custodians. If you have a chance to benchmark those things and track those down, you can many times find opportunities, find some of the weak links in the chain or people that maybe need support in order to be more efficient. Again, as we wind down here, I wanted to give you this. Um, if you're new to the webinar series, this is just a core philosophical approach that I like to leave people with and remind people. And the philosophy is this: if you can't turn things off, then set them back. And if you can't set them back, then tune them up. And I think if you follow this approach as your overall guiding principle for energy management, it helps you in many, many ways to improve. We've got some upcoming webinars and events. Um, in about a week, on July 23rd, we have a Eco Champions community. And if you're not familiar with what that is, it's an internal community to Energy Cap, but we invite all to join. So clients of Energy Cap and non-clients, prospects, we want everybody to be part of the Eco Champions community because the idea is it's about sharing. It's about trying to help one another out and support one another as we all try to do better. And so we have this unique session coming up next week where we're calling it Ask Tom Anything. So in these webinars that I've done, I've presented over the course of 45 minutes or an hour, and there hasn't been a lot of interactive questions during that time normally. And what we want to do is we want to try to change that. So we want to invite people in next week. And if you want to just ask me some different questions or specific questions about what you're dealing with, please join us. Bring some data, bring us some good discussion points, and hopefully we can have an engaging conversation with those who attend. Another thing that's coming up is the middle of next month. We don't have a date firmed up yet, but there's going to be the next in the this energy strategy series, part 8. And my focus a month from now is going to be on M&V, or measurement verification, how we can drive success. So please join us for that. And another opportunity too is we at Energy Cap have an event once a year called Catalyst, and so we're getting together in Orlando, Florida, in the middle part of September. We want to invite all to that. Again, it's bringing people together for the benefit of learning from one another and trying to just all get better. And so as we finish up, Matt, again, could you pop up this poll here and see if anybody would like to have us reach out to them? And Matt, again, I wanted to see too. A lot of times you've helped me with the questions, or just are there any questions that maybe popped up in the chat or in the Q&A?
Yes, you have one question. Gary asked, is portfolio manager adjusted by region?
It's interesting. I think so. Like I'm hesitating a little bit. I'm just trying to remember. I'm almost certain it is. It does two things. I think it adjusts by region, and I think it is also weather normalized. So another term that I didn't say, and maybe I should have over the last half hour, but you need to weather normalize the data in order for it to be a fair comparison. So you're not taking a bad or more severe weather year and comparing it to a mild weather year. But it's my understanding that Energy Star is regionally adjusted for that purpose, since the weather can vary so much. But to be honest with you, Matt, again, what I need to do is when we get done here, I'm gonna double check that.
Awesome.
But I'm pretty sure.
Awesome. And then the other question in the chat is, we utilize Energy Cap. If I wanted to have someone look at our use and how we can better leverage it, who can help with this?
You know what? I would encourage the person to start with me,
Okay.
and then I can maybe decipher better what they're trying to achieve, and either myself help them or steer them towards somebody at our company that could help them out.
Okay. Tom, do you have your email at the last slide? Do you have your
Yeah, let me
contact
just see. I
information?
think I do, and that way yep. Whoopsie. There we go.
There we go. So I believe Leo, you asked that question. So if you want to connect with Tom on LinkedIn and or email him right there, he'll get you all set up and get some solutions going for you.
Yeah, happy to help.
Perfect. But that is all I see in the Q&A and the chat.
Perfect. Okay. I think unless there are questions that pop up, I think we'll put a wrap on it. But thank you everybody for attending, and please offer feedback. I try to solicit that often. I really want to try to meet your needs. So if there are things you want to learn about or suggestions you have, please share them so we can try to provide content that's helpful to you.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Again, this recording will be posted shortly after the webinar, probably tomorrow afternoon on our website under resources, under webinars. But yes, stay tuned for our next webinars. Stay, updated on our LinkedIn. Also, we post all of our upcoming webinars on our website as well. So stay updated on there. But we hope to see you at our next webinars as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matt, again, and thanks everybody for joining. Have a wonderful day, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.